The auction house smelled of tobacco and greed. Sarah clutched her thin shawl against the autumn chill that seeped through the cracked windows of the Philadelphia hall. Her father stood beside the auctioneer, his face hard as stone, refusing to meet her desperate gaze. The year was 1876, and women were still property in the eyes of men who valued gold over blood. "Gentlemen, we have here Miss Sarah Collins, age 22, educated, obedient, and of good health," the auctioneer announced with the same enthusiasm he might use to sell livestock. Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation as dozens of eyes assessed her like merchandise. Her father had gambled away everything they owned, and now she was the final payment for his debts. The winning bidder would gain a wife, and her father would gain his freedom from the loan sharks circling like vultures. Marcus Thornton stepped forward from the crowd. His expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as a man of considerable wealth. His eyes were cold, calculating, devoid of warmth or kindness. Sarah had heard whispers about Thornton, a railroad baron who crushed anyone standing between him and profit, including the native tribes whose lands he coveted. He was twice her age, with a reputation for cruelty that made even hardened businessmen uncomfortable. $5,000, Thornton called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The room fell silent. It was an astronomical sum, far beyond what anyone expected. Sarah's father nodded eagerly, relief washing over his cowardly features. The auctioneer raised his gavel, ready to seal her fate with 3 sharp strikes against wood. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back tears that would only prove her weakness to these heartless men. 10,000. The voice came from the back of the room, deep and steady, carrying an accent Sarah couldn't place. Every head turned. A tall man moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. His skin was bronze, his long black hair tied back with leather cord. He wore a mixture of native clothing and a simple shirt, completely out of place among the suits and top hats. His presence commanded attention without demanding it. Thornton's face twisted with rage. "You have no right to be here, savage. This is a civilized establishment." The slur hung in the air like poison. Several men nodded in agreement, their prejudice plain on their faces. But the stranger seemed unmoved by the hatred directed at him. He reached into a leather pouch and produced a stack of bills that made even Thornton's eyes widen. The money was real, earned through trading and careful negotiation with honest merchants who valued integrity over skin color. "The auction is open to anyone with coin," the stranger said calmly. "I have coin. Do you question American currency?" His English was perfect, his logic unassailable. The auctioneer looked between Thornton and the stranger, greed warring with prejudice in his expression. Money won, as it always did. The gavel fell 3 times, each strike echoing like thunder in Sarah's chest. "Sold to the gentleman for $10,000. The stranger handed over the money without hesitation. Sarah felt her world spinning. She had escaped one nightmare only to fall into another she couldn't comprehend. What did this man want with her? Why would he pay such an outrageous sum? Thornton stormed out, his fury promising future trouble. Her father took his payment and disappeared without a backward glance, leaving Sarah alone with her new owner. The stranger approached her slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. Up close, she could see the strength in his features, the intelligence in his dark eyes, and something else she didn't expect, kindness. He extended his hand, not to grab or claim, but to offer. "My name is Lakota," he said quietly. "It means friend to everyone. You have nothing to fear from me, Sarah Collins. I promise you that on my honor as chief of my people." Sarah stared at his outstretched hand, her mind reeling. A chief? What kind of future awaited her now? The train carried them away from Philadelphia's smoke and corruption toward the open territories of the West. Sarah sat across from Lakota in a private compartment, watching the landscape transform from crowded cities to endless plains. 3 days had passed since the auction, and he hadn't touched her, hadn't demanded anything, hadn't even raised his voice. Instead, he treated her with a respect she'd never known from any man, including her own father. "Why did you buy me?" Sarah finally asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them like an invisible wall. She needed to understand. Men didn't spend fortunes without expecting returns on their investments. Her education had taught her that much about the world's cruel economics. Lakota looked up from the book he was reading. Surprisingly, it was Shakespeare. "I didn't buy you, Sarah. I bought your freedom. There's a difference." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made her throat tight with emotion. "Marcus Thornton has been stealing land from my people for years. He builds his railroads through our hunting grounds, poisons our water, and kills our buffalo. I heard he was looking for a wife to give him respectability in Washington, to help him lobby for more contracts. I couldn't let him have another victory. Sarah absorbed this information slowly. So you spent $10,000 just to spite a railroad baron? It seemed insane, reckless, the act of either a fool or someone with principles so strong they defied common sense. She wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. Not spite. Justice. Lakota closed his book and leaned forward, his expression earnest. My people believe that all actions create ripples in the world. Thornton's cruelty creates waves of suffering. By preventing his marriage, I prevent the political power he would gain. By freeing you from him, I create a different kind of ripple. Perhaps a better one. His philosophy was foreign to everything Sarah had learned in her privileged but poisonous upbringing. And what do you expect from me now? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This was the question that had haunted her for 3 days. She was still a possession in the eyes of the law, still bought and paid for, regardless of his pretty words about freedom and justice. Lakota smiled sadly. I expect nothing. When we reach my territory, you'll be given a choice. Stay with my tribe as a free woman, or take this money and start a new life wherever you wish. He pulled out an envelope thick with bills. $2,000. Enough to live independently for years if you're careful. The choice will be entirely yours. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't born of fear or despair. No one had ever given her a choice about anything. Her education, her clothes, her daily activities, all had been dictated by her father's whims and society's expectations. The concept of genuine freedom was so foreign it felt like a word from another language. The train lurched suddenly, throwing Sarah against the window. Shouts erupted from the other cars, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Lakota moved instantly, pulling Sarah down below the window level. Stay low, he commanded, his gentle demeanor replaced by the alert intensity of a warrior. Through the glass, Sarah glimpsed riders alongside the train, their faces covered with bandanas, pistols firing into the air. Bandits. Sarah gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. Stories of train robberies filled Eastern newspapers, tales of violence and murder that seemed distant until the moment they became terrifyingly real. Worse. Lakota's jaw tightened. Those are Thornton's men. I recognize the horses. The revelation sent ice through Sarah's veins. Thornton hadn't accepted his defeat. Men like him never did. They took what they wanted through force when money failed them. The train began to slow, brakes squealing in protest, exactly what the attackers wanted. Lakota grabbed Sarah's hand, his grip strong but not painful. Listen carefully. When the train stops, we run. There's a river about half a mile north. Can you run that far? His eyes searched hers, measuring her courage, her strength, her will to survive. Sarah thought about her life in Philadelphia, the endless tea parties, the suffocating corsets, the expectation that women should be delicate, decorative, and dependent. I can run, she said firmly, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. Something had awakened inside her during these 3 days of freedom, something that refused to go back into the cage her old life represented. Lakota nodded with approval, seeing in her eyes what she was only beginning to recognize in herself, the capacity for courage she never knew she possessed. The train shuddered to a complete stop. Gunfire echoed through the cars as Thornton's men boarded, searching, hunting, determined to reclaim what they believed they owned. Lakota kicked open the compartment door and pulled Sarah into the corridor. Other passengers cowered in their seats, too terrified to interfere or help. The American West was still wild, still lawless, still a place where might made right. They jumped from the moving platform, hitting the ground hard. Sarah's dress tore on the brush, but she ignored the sting of scratches on her legs. Behind them, angry voices shouted orders. Bullets whined through the air like deadly insects. Lakota pulled her forward, and together they ran toward an uncertain future, leaving behind everything except hope. The prairie grass whipped against Sarah's legs as she ran, her lungs burning with effort. She had never run like this in her life, not the careful, modest hurrying expected of ladies, but a desperate sprint for survival. Lakota moved ahead of her with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his life in open spaces, constantly glancing back to ensure she kept pace. The shouts of Thornton's men grew closer, their horses thundering across the plains like approaching doom. There. Lakota pointed ahead where a line of cottonwood trees marked the river's path. The Missouri stretched wide and swift, its brown waters churning with spring snowmelt from distant mountains. It was their only chance. Horses could outrun humans on open ground, but water was different. Water was an equalizer that demanded respect regardless of wealth or weapons. They crashed through the underbrush and hit the riverbank at full speed. Sarah didn't hesitate. She plunged into the icy water, gasping as the cold shocked her system. Her heavy skirts immediately soaked through, dragging her down like anchors designed by cruel men who never imagined women might need to move freely. Lakota dove in beside her, his strong arms cutting through the current with powerful strokes. "Don't fight the river," he called over the rushing water. "Let it carry you downstream." It went against every instinct Sarah had, surrendering control to forces beyond her command, but she forced herself to trust him. She relaxed her struggling limbs and let the current take her. The river was strong but not malicious, powerful but not personal in its force. It simply was, indifferent to human dramas playing out within its embrace. Gunshots cracked from the shore. Thornton's men had reached the bank, firing wildly at the water. Bullets kicked up small geysers around them, but the river's churning surface made accurate shooting impossible. Sarah sucked in a lungful of air before a wave washed over her head, pulling her under. Panic clawed at her throat until she felt Lakota's hand grip her arm, steadying her, reminding her she wasn't alone in this fight. They drifted downstream for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The current eventually pushed them toward a bend where fallen trees created a natural barrier. Lakota grabbed an overhanging branch and pulled them both toward the bank. Sarah's arms trembled with exhaustion as she dragged herself onto solid ground, collapsing in the mud, her entire body shaking from cold and adrenaline. "We can't stop long," Lakota said, though he too was breathing hard. Water streamed from his hair, and his clothes clung to his muscular frame. For the first time, Sarah noticed a long scar across his shoulder, evidence of battle survived, of pain endured. "Thornton's men will follow the river. We need to reach my people before dark." Sarah nodded, too exhausted for words. She struggled to her feet, nearly falling as her soaked skirts tangled around her ankles. Without hesitation, Lakota pulled out a knife. Sarah flinched, old fears surfacing despite everything, but he simply knelt and began cutting away the excess fabric of her dress, shortening it to a practical length that allowed movement. His touch was clinical, efficient, completely respectful. When he finished, Sarah felt lighter in more ways than one. They moved inland, away from the river's obvious path. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Sarah's feet blistered inside her ruined boots, but she didn't complain. Complaining was a luxury for people with choices, and she had none except to keep moving forward. Lakota occasionally stopped to examine broken twigs or disturbed grass, reading the land like others read books. "Your people," Sarah finally said, her voice hoarse. "What will they think of me?" The question had haunted her since leaving the train. She would be an outsider, a white woman in a native camp, a living reminder of all the betrayals and broken treaties that defined relations between their peoples. Why would they welcome someone who looked like their oppressors? Lakota considered her question carefully. "They'll be suspicious at first. Cautious. We've been hurt too many times by promises from people who look like you. But my people judge by actions, not skin. If you show respect, learn our ways, contribute to the community, you'll be accepted. It won't be easy, Sarah. You'll have to prove yourself every day. But it's possible. I've seen it happen before." His honesty was refreshing after a lifetime of polite lies and social pleasantries that meant nothing. Sarah appreciated that he didn't pretend the path ahead would be simple. She was tired of being treated like a child who couldn't handle difficult truths. "And if I choose to leave? To take the money and start over somewhere else? Then I'll escort you to the nearest town with a train station, make sure you're safe, and wish you well." Lakota's voice carried no judgment, no attempt to manipulate her decision. "Freedom means the choice is genuinely yours, Sarah. Not just words to make you feel better while I control your destiny. Real freedom. The kind that terrifies us because we can't blame anyone else for what we choose." They crested a small hill and Lakota stopped suddenly, his hand raised in a signal Sarah instinctively obeyed. Below them, spread across the valley, dozens of teepees formed a circle around a central fire pit. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children played with dogs, women worked on hides, and men tended horses. It looked nothing like the savage encampments described in Eastern newspapers. It looked like a community, like home, like belonging. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a strange pull she couldn't name. But before they could descend, riders appeared from the opposite direction. Thornton's men, 6 of them, cutting off their path to safety. They had been outflanked, outmaneuvered, trapped between enemies and uncertainty. Lakota's hand moved to the knife at his belt, his only weapon against 6 armed men. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, his body positioning itself as a shield between Sarah and danger. In that moment, she understood something profound. This man, who owed her nothing, who had already given her more than anyone in her life, was prepared to die protecting a woman he barely knew. Not because he owned her or wanted something from her, but simply because it was right. Sarah stepped forward to stand beside him instead of behind him. "No," she said firmly. "If we face them together." The 6 riders spread out in a semicircle, blocking any escape route. Their leader was a scarred man named Pike, whose reputation for brutality had preceded him even to Philadelphia's drawing rooms. He worked exclusively for Thornton, doing the dirty work that even corrupt businessmen preferred to keep at arm's length from their public personas. Pike smiled, revealing broken teeth stained with tobacco, the smile of a man who enjoyed his work too much. "Mr. Thornton sends his regards," Pike drawled, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Says you stole his property, Chief. Now, we can do this easy or hard. Your choice. But either way, the lady comes with us." The other men chuckled darkly, their intentions clear in their leering expressions. These weren't men who followed rules or showed mercy. They were wolves in human skin. "Sarah Collins is not property," Lakota replied, his voice steady despite facing impossible odds. "She's a free woman under her own authority. Your employer has no legal claim to her." He spoke with the careful precision of someone who understood law, who had studied the systems designed to oppress his people, learning to use their own words as weapons. Pike spat in the dirt. "Don't care much about legal when I got 6 guns and you got a knife, boy. Last chance. Step aside, or we put you down like the dog you are." The racial hatred dripping from his words was casual, reflexive, the poison of a society built on hierarchies of human worth. Sarah felt rage building inside her, hot and cleansing, burning away years of taught passivity. Before Lakota could respond, a war cry split the air. Warriors poured over the hilltop, dozens of them, armed with rifles and traditional weapons, their faces painted for battle. They moved with coordinated precision, surrounding Pike's men in seconds. The cavalry had arrived, but not the kind Pike expected. These were Lakota's people, alerted by scouts who had spotted the intruders on tribal lands. The tables had turned completely. Pike's confidence evaporated. His men raised their hands slowly, suddenly aware of how thoroughly they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. One of the warriors, an older man with gray braiding his hair and wearing a chief's regalia, approached on a magnificent spotted horse. His presence commanded instant respect from everyone present, native and white alike. His face bore the lines of someone who had seen too much suffering but never surrendered to despair. "Father," Lakota said, relief evident in his voice. Sarah's eyes widened. This was Lakota's father, the tribal chief, a leader of people fighting to survive in a world determined to erase them. The older chief looked at his son, then at Sarah, his expression unreadable. He spoke in his native language, rapid and fluid, questioning Lakota. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she heard the concern, the love, the careful weighing of consequences. Lakota responded in the same language, gesturing toward Sarah, then toward Pike and his men. He was explaining everything: the auction, Thornton's pursuit, their desperate flight, Sarah's choice to stand with him rather than hide behind him. His father listened intently, occasionally glancing at Sarah with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, measuring her worth by standards completely different from those she'd known. Finally, the elder chief spoke in English, his words directed at Pike. "You are on Lakota land without permission. You threaten my son and his guest. By rights, I should let my warriors show you what we do to those who bring violence to our homes." He paused, letting the threat sink in. Pike had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the evening cool. "But we are not the savages you believe us to be. You will leave now. Tell Marcus Thornton that Sarah Collins is under our protection. If he sends men here again, they will not return." Pike needed no further encouragement. He and his men turned their horses and rode hard toward the horizon, their tails between their legs, their bravado shattered by the reality of facing people who refused to be victims. Sarah watched them go, feeling something like satisfaction mixed with profound relief. For the first time in her life, she had seen justice delivered without courts or lawyers or the corrupt machinery of civilization. The elder chief dismounted and approached Sarah directly. She fought the urge to curtsy or lower her eyes, instincts drilled into her by years of submission training. Instead, she met his gaze steadily, showing respect without subservience. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "My son has told me of your courage. running from the train, diving into the river, standing with him against armed men. These are not the actions of the weak women we hear live in your cities. I'm learning that I'm stronger than I was taught to believe, Sarah replied honestly. Your son gave me the chance to discover that. She glanced at Dakota, who watched the exchange with careful attention. He saved me from a terrible fate, asked nothing in return, and offered me freedom I never thought possible. Whatever honor exists in your son, Chief, it comes from you. The elder chief's stern expression softened slightly. You have diplomatic words. But words are easy. Actions prove character. My son says you wish to stay with us, to learn our ways. This will not be simple. Our people have suffered greatly from those who share your skin color. You will face suspicion, perhaps hostility. Can you bear this burden? Sarah thought about Philadelphia, about drawing rooms full of people who spoke kindly while harboring cruelty in their hearts, about her father who sold her like furniture, about a society that valued appearance over substance. She thought about the river's cold water, about running until her lungs burned, about standing beside Dakota when she could have cowered. She thought about who she had been and who she might become. I can bear it, she said simply. Because bearing difficulty while free is better than comfort in chains. Your son taught me that. The elder chief nodded slowly, something like approval flickering in his ancient eyes. He spoke again in his native language, addressing the gathered warriors. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she felt their significance. A decision had been made. Her future had taken shape. Dakota stepped closer, translating quietly. My father welcomes you to our tribe as a guest and potential member. You'll be given a teepee, provided with clothing and supplies. You'll be expected to contribute through work, to learn our language and customs, to prove your commitment through action rather than promises. After one full turn of seasons, if you still wish to stay and the tribe accepts you, you'll be adopted formally. Until then, you remain under our protection. Sarah felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. Crying would wait for private moments, for when the weight of everything truly settled on her shoulders. For now, she needed to show strength. Thank you, she said to both men. I won't disappoint your trust. She meant every word with an intensity that surprised her. As the sun finally set, painting the valley in purple shadows, Sarah walked with Dakota toward the circle of teepees, toward a life she couldn't have imagined a week ago, toward freedom earned through courage she never knew she possessed. Winter arrived early that year, covering the plains in snow that transformed the world into something both beautiful and harsh. Sarah's hands, once soft and useless, had grown calloused from tanning hides, gathering firewood, and learning skills that no finishing school ever taught. Her back ached from bending over work, her shoulders burned from carrying water, her fingers cracked from cold. She had never been happier in her life. The tribe called her Washtuan now, good woman, a name earned through months of persistent effort and genuine respect. The elderly women who had initially regarded her with cold suspicion now invited her to their fires, teaching her their language through patient repetition and occasional laughter at her pronunciation mistakes. The children who once hid behind their mother's skirts now ran to her with scraped knees and small troubles, trusting her to help. Dakota's father had become an unexpected mentor. He taught her the tribe's history, their philosophy, their understanding of balance and reciprocity that governed all relationships. Your people take, he explained one evening as they sat by his fire. They take land, take resources, take lives, and call it progress. My people understand that you cannot take without giving back. The earth provides, but we must provide for the earth. Humans need community, but we must contribute to community. Everything is circles, not lines. Your civilization draws lines, borders, hierarchies, divisions. Our way seeks circles, cycles, connections, completeness. Sarah absorbed these teachings like drought-parched earth absorbing rain. She began to understand how profoundly her upbringing had distorted her view of the world, teaching her to see everything in terms of ownership rather than relationship, competition rather than cooperation, dominance rather than balance. The unlearning was harder than any new skill she acquired, requiring her to examine every assumption she had ever accepted as truth. Her relationship with Dakota had evolved into something complex and undefined by the categories she once knew. They weren't husband and wife, weren't simply friends, weren't master and servant. They were something her old language had no word for, two people choosing each day to honor the connection between them without needing to claim or control it. He still offered her the money to leave whenever she wished. She still chose to stay. One evening, as spring approached and the ice began breaking on the rivers, Dakota found her outside her teepee, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He sat beside her without speaking, respecting the silence that had become comfortable between them. Finally, Sarah broke it. "I've been thinking about the auction," she said quietly. "About my father selling me, about Thornton trying to buy me, about you paying for my freedom. I was angry about being property for so long." "You had every right to that anger," Dakota replied. "You were treated abominably. Your father betrayed every duty a parent owes a child. Thornton saw you as an acquisition. The system that allowed that auction to happen is rotten to its foundation." His validation of her feelings was something she'd learned to value. He never tried to minimize her pain or rush her past it. "But I realized something," Sarah continued. "I was so focused on not being owned that I never considered what it means to truly belong. Belonging isn't the same as being possessed. Belonging is choosing to be part of something larger than yourself while remaining whole. I belong here now, Dakota. Not because you bought me or because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose this every morning when I wake. That's the difference between ownership and belonging. The choice." Dakota turned to look at her, his expression illuminated by moonlight. "My people have a saying, Mitakuya o Yazaing. It means all my relations, all my relatives. When we say this, we acknowledge our connection to everything: people, animals, earth, sky, past, present, future. You are part of those relations now, Sarah. Not because I brought you here, but because you chose to become part of the circle." He paused, then added softly, "I'm honored by your choice." Sarah felt her heart stutter. Something had been growing between them all winter, unspoken but undeniable. She saw it in the way his eyes found her across the camp, in how his voice softened when he spoke her name, in the careful distance he maintained out of respect for her autonomy. She had been owned once. She wouldn't be owned again. But she could choose. That was the profound difference that changed everything. "In my old world," Sarah said carefully, "I would wait for you to speak first, to declare intentions, to ask permission from some male authority. But I'm not in that world anymore. So I'll speak plainly, the way your people value. I have feelings for you, Dakota. Deep feelings that grow stronger each day. But I need to know they're not just gratitude for rescue or attachment born from dependence. I need to know they're real." Dakota's response was immediate and honest. "I felt something when I first saw you at that auction. Not attraction, though you're beautiful. Not pity, though your situation was terrible. I saw strength hidden under fear, fire smothered under submission, a person trapped in a cage of others' making. I saw someone worth fighting for, worth believing in. Everything since then has only confirmed what I sensed in that moment. You're remarkable, Sarah. Not despite your background, not in spite of your struggles, but because of how you've transformed them into wisdom." The words hung between them, fragile and precious as the first flowers of spring pushing through snow. Sarah reached out slowly, giving Dakota every opportunity to withdraw, and took his hand. His fingers intertwined with hers, rough calluses against her own earned calluses, two people who had both fought battles and carried scars. "Your father told me that in your tradition, marriage is not about ownership but partnership. That couples choose each other freely and remain free even in union. Is that true?" "It's true," Dakota confirmed. "Marriage in our way is two people choosing to walk the same path while each maintains their own moccasins. We walk together, but neither carries the other. We support, but don't possess. We honor the connection without forgetting individual wholeness. It's harder than your people's marriage in some ways. It requires both people to be strong, not one strong and one weak." "Then I want to choose you," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Not because I need rescuing anymore, but because I want a partner in building a life worth living. I want to choose you, and keep choosing you, every day. If you'll have me." Dakota pulled her close, and for the first time, they kissed, not as master and property, not as savior and saved, but as two free people choosing connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "We'll do this properly," Dakota said. "I'll speak to my father, we'll have ceremonies, the tribe will celebrate. But yes, Sarah Collins, Washtuan, woman who ran through rivers and stood against guns, woman who chose strength over comfort and truth over convenience, yes, I want to walk this path with you." Spring fully arrived weeks later, bringing with it transformation. The prairie exploded with wildflowers, rivers ran high with snowmelt, and Sarah and Dakota were married in a ceremony that honored both their traditions. She wore buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork created by the tribal women who had become her sisters. He wore his finest regalia, looking every inch the chief he would someday become. His father presided over the ceremony, his words speaking of balance, respect, freedom, and choice. As Sarah looked into Dakota's eyes and made her vows, promises freely given, not extracted through coercion or commerce, she thought about the woman she had been just 1 year ago. That frightened girl standing on an auction block seemed like someone from another lifetime, another world. In a way, she was. That Sarah had died in the icy waters of the Missouri River. This Sarah had been born through choice, through courage, through the radical notion that she could define her own worth. Later, as the tribe celebrated with food, dancing, and stories around the fire, Sarah stood apart for a moment, watching. She saw children playing, elders laughing, families together, a community that had survived genocide, forced marches, broken treaties, and systematic destruction of their way of life. They had survived because they understood something her civilization had forgotten, that strength comes not from domination but from connection, not from ownership but from belonging, not from taking but from giving. Dakota found her there, wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her head. "Second thoughts?" he asked teasingly. She could hear the smile in his voice, the security of someone who knew the answer but enjoyed hearing it anyway. "Not even first thoughts," Sarah replied, leaning back into his embrace. "I was just thinking about honor. About how your honor, your promise to free me, saved my life. But it also showed me what honor really means. It's not about following rules or maintaining appearances. It's about doing what's right even when it costs you something, about keeping promises even when no one would know if you broke them, about treating people as valuable because they exist, not because of what they can give you." "You've learned our ways well," Dakota said softly. "But you've also taught us something too. You've reminded us that courage isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose, again and again, despite fear. You chose courage when you could have chosen safety. You chose growth when you could have chosen comfort. You chose us when you could have chosen the familiar. That's the greatest gift you could give, showing us that change is possible, that people can transcend the limits placed on them, that hope is not foolish but necessary." As the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed her despair on an auction block and now witnessed her joy, Sarah understood that she had not been rescued by Dakota's honor alone. She had been rescued by her own choice to honor the person she discovered she could be. The marriage, the tribe, the new life, these were not endings but beginnings. Every morning she would wake and choose again. Choose courage over fear. Choose growth over stagnation. Choose love over bitterness. Choose belonging over isolation. The story that had begun with a transaction, with money exchanging hands and a woman treated as property, had transformed into something no one at that auction could have imagined. It had become a story about freedom, about honor, about two people from different worlds creating a third world together, built on respect and choice. It had become a story about becoming, the never-ending work of growing into the people we have the courage to be. And as Sarah stood there under the vast prairie sky, surrounded by her chosen family, holding the hand of the man who had seen her worth when the world declared her worthless, she knew one truth with absolute certainty. She had finally come home, not to a place, but to herself. That was the promise Dakota's honor had kept, not just freedom from something, but freedom for something. Freedom to choose. Freedom to become. Freedom to belong while remaining whole. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky like prayers, like promises, like the very essence of hope itself. And Sarah, once bought for marriage but rescued by honor, knew that her story, their story, was just beginning.